Making headlines for this week of April 29th. EU under fire, resistance, referenda, and removal of sanctions. 3T terror, global trade agreements attempt to break BRICS and keep humanity in corporate commercial enslavement. Trapping Trudeau, school student corners Canadian Prime Minister on issue of genocide and third world conditions among Indigenous nations. And the illusion of reality, exploring the nature of what is not, or what may be, according to perception.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. In what appears to be good news, at least at this time, there are voices in Europe that appear to be succeeding in making the cabal establishment aware that they will no longer just sit silently on the sidelines and behave like good little sheep. Rumblings were beginning in France back around the middle of March. Several articles, one by Selena Sykes of the London Express and another by Josh Lowe of Newsweek Europe, began reporting that in advance of an upcoming UK referendum in June on whether to stay in the EU or Brexit, meaning a British exit from the EU, the people of France, Germany, and others have begun making similar demands. Sykes' article reports that with Britons set to go to the polls in June, there are increasing signs that UK's referendum is paving the way for other European countries to question their own relationship with Brussels. It comes after calls for Germany to have its own EU referendum in the aftermath of the migrant crisis. In a fresh blow to the EU, 53% of the French voted in favor of holding a UK-style referendum on the country's membership. Lowe, in his article, goes even further, reporting that first there was Brexit, the possibility of Britain leaving the European Union in its upcoming membership referendum. Then there was Czech Prime Minister Bohuslav Sobotka's irresistible coinage of Czechsit to warn of knock-on referenda elsewhere in the EU. Now a poll suggests that we could be dealing with the threat of Frexit, a French exit, Swexit, a Swedish exit, Jurexit, German exit, and Spexit in Spain in the not-too-distant future. Research from Edinburgh University shows that 53% of French would like to hold their own vote on EU membership, and in Spain, Germany, and Sweden, more people are in favor of doing so than are opposed. Tensions continue to build, not only in terms of people's protests against the actions of the global cabal, but also the tensions between governing institutions. Unfolding events would seem to suggest that the EU, controlled by an unelected power body, may be headed towards a breakup. But the questions seem to be, from whom will the first strike come, and in which way will this blow be dealt to the power brokers? Protests have been breaking out in several countries across Europe, triggered by anything from austerity cuts to banker bail-ins to leaving the EU, or protesting against any one of the several corporate secretive trade agreements that will steal freedom away from nation-states. Support for the US-led sanctions against Russia continues to be fading, as fractures are beginning to form between former US allies as countries seek to protect their own interests instead of merely supporting a US agenda that is rapidly losing steam on the global stage. In France, the French Parliament has recently passed legislation and in a 55-44 vote called for the lifting of sanctions against Russia. We have more in this report from RT.
Pour 55, contre 44, la résolution est adoptée. The resolution was put forward by parliamentarian Terry Mariani. And RT contributor Anya Baranova can now join me live from Paris with details on this. How did the vote of the National Assembly go today?
Écoute, Well, for Russia, I suppose, 55 to 44 votes in favour of lifting the sanctions. A lot of things were mentioned, the neutrality of, for example, the agriculture, how the economy in France is suffering, how everything's gone wrong since the sanctions were imposed, basically. And certain speakers, for example, Marine Le Pen, she went as far as to say that, well, Europe is really suffering from these sanctions. The US keeps on doing business as usual with Russia and doesn't lose that much money, while Europe is losing, especially in the agriculture sector, quite a lot.
The restrictions were imposed on Russia more than 2 years ago, with many world leaders supporting the idea.
Sanctions. We make sure that unacceptable actions will bear very serious consequences.
Sanctions must be lifted if there is some progress. If there is no progress, the sanctions will stay in place. Well, EU and US sanctions against Russia were imposed back in 2014 over the crisis in Ukraine. They hit individuals as well as organizations in various parts of the economy. Russia responded with its own restrictions on food imports. The ban on fruit, vegetables, meat and dairy products has sparked protests across Europe by large numbers of farmers affected.
The Russian embargo for some years now has brought serious damage to several sectors, from vegetables to fruit and milk. The lifting of the embargo would generate additional market share, which could generate some hope for farmers. Half of the farmers are currently in great difficulty, which means that within a year they could simply disappear.
Now, before the vote, we spoke to French MP Thierry Mariani. He thinks the sanctions are hurting everyone, and France could become the first EU state to officially come out against them.
Moi, j'ai envie d'aider le gouvernement.
I want to help the government, even though I am part of the opposition, because I see all these socialist ministers in Moscow or elsewhere who echo the thought that sanctions should be lifted. I have seen our Minister of Agriculture stand in front of our farmers and say, we have to lift the sanctions. I have seen our Minister of Finance reiterate the same thing. And all they do is say, we can't do anything, Europe is to blame. Let's be honest here, it's up to Europe to decide. And in order for it to do so, one country must have the guts to say, enough, I'm out. I think that if Europe shows Kiev that we are no longer the prisoners of its government, that after all we have paid the price of solidarity, we introduce these sanctions and it's time to lift them, since they do no good and they only hurt us. I guess then, and only then, things are going to improve.
The US-led sanctions appear to be part of a multi-tiered strategic attack on the BRICS alliance of countries, as this group of nations is actively now beginning to assert its dominance on the global stage in terms of politics and finance. While the US desperately tries to prevent the imminent demise of the US dollar as a global reserve currency, some report that this is already a reality. The BRICS alliance members continue to move forward with their own agenda and with their own banking and political institutions to compete against the Western institutions. The movement is increasingly more to the east, as nations begin to see the writing on the wall and realize that it is better to walk away from the US and its fraudulent, fake monetary system and align behind a system that is showing itself to be backed by gold or at least something of tangible value. CVN has reported in the past how events unfolding in Brazil are seeking to destabilize the leadership of Dilma Rousseff just ahead of the Olympics that are due to be held in Brazil in several months. If the cabal succeeds in either breaking or bankrupting Brazil, they, the global cabal, are hoping that a cascading reaction will break up BRICS before NATO and the EU collapse. Eric Draitser, in an article appearing on the Russia Insider website on April 21st, notes that the US-NATO empire, with its centers of power in Washington, on Wall Street, and in the City of London, is on the offensive against the BRICS countries. This assault takes many forms, each tailored to its specific target. The ongoing soft coup in Brazil has recently entered a new stage with the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff of the left-wing Workers' Party. Simultaneously, the destabilization of the ANC-led government in South Africa continues as political forces align to remove President Jacob Zuma. These two situations illustrate clearly the very potent forms of subversion via Western-funded political formations and movements being employed against Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the bloc of emerging economies, also known as BRICS. Draitser then mentions Russia, adding that Russia is the target of a multifaceted, asymmetric campaign of destabilization that has employed economic, political, and psychological forms of warfare, each of which has been specifically designed to inflict maximum damage on the Kremlin. While the results of this multi-pronged assault have been mixed, and their ultimate effect being the subject of much debate, Moscow is, without a doubt, ground zero in a global assault against the BRICS nations. The West seems to be under the belief that Russia is economically vulnerable, and there may be some degree of truth to that. If one assesses Russia according to the old financial paradigm, then this may be true. What Western pundits and media are not acknowledging, however, is that Russia has been buying up gold, and lots of it, in preparation for the new financial paradigm. It is currently believed by some sources that the U.S. does not have the gold that it is claiming to have, and, as reported on the newscast last week, the West tries to blow off the importance and value of gold and silver at this time. Breaking up the BRICS, however, could be an attempt to seize control of some of those metal resources, as the U.S. realizes that oil no longer has the value it once had. In other geopolitical news, there is something else going on around the world as the global cabal attempts to make what could be a final concerted effort to get humanity and the planet fully under corporate control and enslavement, once and for all, believing, maybe naively, that it will preserve their power over the planet. There is a complicated system of agreements in place. In the show summary, I will post a photo that shows this complex arrangement. There are three primary trade agreements that are being attempted at this time: the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, and also the Trade-in Services Agreement, or TISA. There is only one country that stands in the middle of all three agreements, and this is the United States. Several countries are involved with only one of the agreements with the U.S., while other countries have signed on to two agreements, with the U.S. still being at the center of it all. An article on the Unit UK website is reporting that the real reason that Obama was willing to come to Britain recently was to persuade the UK to stay in the EU because of the TTIP agreement. An 11-minute video from August of last year explaining the trade deals is available and will be available in the show summary. What the deals also represent are a targeted exclusion of the BRICS countries to prevent the emerging economies from gaining alliances with the rest of the world.
This is something enormous. It is about a final control, and it's the United States saying there may be another power in the world, but we will be the ultimate power.
The TTIP is the most important thing that is happening in Europe right now. It's a secretive deal being negotiated between Europe and the United States.
Once signed, it will cement a key part of the US government's plan to create a new global bloc that will ensure the dominance of its largest companies. And to understand why, we need to go back to the 1950s.
See the USA in your Chevrolet. America is asking you to call. Drive your Chevrolet through the USA.
After the Second World War, the United States accounted for half of the world's economy. Its influence was unmatched by any country, and it was able to write the early rules of international trade to its advantage. The World Trade Organization was created in this context, and the US dictated rules that favored American business. But as economies like China and India joined the WTO, it became a more democratized arena, and the US found it harder to control its decision-making.
At the WTO, at its Doha rounds, India spoke up and Brazil spoke up, and the US lost control.
The US felt it needed a new strategy to maintain its global dominance. So in the classical American style, they went big. To bypass the WTO, they're creating the biggest international agreements that the world has ever seen. They're called the 3 Big T's. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP, and the Trade in Services Agreement, or TISA. And they're all being negotiated in secret right now.
We only found out when WikiLeaks was able to leak parts of them.
And what's interesting is when you look across all of these deals, whether it be TTIP, TPP or TISA, China is excluded, but also Brazil, Russia, India, South Africa, they're all excluded because those are the emerging economies.
What is not often understood is that these agreements are part of a geopolitical war. This is a new war which is taking place between the United States and China. The United States is very scared of the rise of China, so it has moved to militarily encircle it through what is called the pivot to Asia, and now it's moving on to doing that economically.
The basic idea which comes across from reading US strategy papers is the construction of a new grand enclosure. And to put inside this grand enclosure the United States, 51 other countries, 1.6 billion people, and 2/3 of global GDP. To integrate Latin America away from Brazil and towards the United States, to integrate Southeast Asia away from China and towards the United States, and to integrate Western Europe, pulling it away from Eurasia as a whole and towards the Atlantic.
What is democratic about an enormous imposition of power on countries whose citizens have no way of knowing what's going on, of debating it, or influencing their government in its decision? That's anti-democratic.
The history of these agreements shows that they're very difficult to change unless people can see what's in them. And that's why they're kept secret. Because when the contents are revealed, it generates an opposition.
For those choosing to view the full video in the show summary, they will find that these trading agreements will essentially force countries around the world to accept the substandard products and unhealthy genetically modified foods from the US that are, at this time, banned under current EU legislation. This is just one of the horrors contained within these trading documents. It is also for this reason that informed people are becoming more vocal in sharing with others how they are being manipulated, controlled, and maintained in enslavement. Although the story may sound ominous, it remains my personal belief, based on other things happening around the world at this time, that even though there are forces attempting to implement corporate international trading agreements, binding countries under corporate commercial control, there is so much more happening to suggest that they will not get away with it. If the global cabal still had the power that it claims to have at this time, I suspect that it would be highly unlikely that the voice of the people would be sounding so loudly and so clearly around the world at this time. And I doubt that people would have access to the information they are getting access to. And I also highly doubt that people would not be exposing all the false flag events so readily and so easily. We do not know the big picture. What is important is to remain informed as to what is going on, but try to avoid being drawn into the dramas and energies of what is unfolding. Observe, but continue to hold the focus that the power of the people is winning this war over, even if we may not yet fully understand how this is being achieved. As people worldwide awaken to realize that a lot of serious crap is beginning to unfold around the world, they are also, or they may also be wondering about the other mystery groups that are seeking to help restore global control and take power away from the cabal entities that have been enslaving the planet. This I alluded to at the end of the previous story, where people may be wondering exactly how this is being achieved. And this is a little bit tricky. There are a number of secretive groups that are being reported on in a number of websites. Although it is my personal feeling that there are secretive groups working behind the scenes to help take down this global cabal, I cannot, as a journalist, just ask people to take my word for this, because I am unable to offer, at least at this time, any kind of reasonable or substantive proof or corroboration as to their existence. There are sources reporting information that seems to feel right to me personally, but I would feel better being more directly involved with an individual or a group that is achieving this before reporting too much, because there is just far too much disinformation going around at this time. This is one reason why I am reporting the Mohawk Initiative, because I am directly involved with people I trust and with people who trust me, and this makes reporting this story more meaningful for all involved. At the geopolitical level, however, there are other groups at work, although the mainstream media, the Western media, does not give them any attention. While the media will cover events involving the IMF, World Bank, the G7, G20, and other certain political and financial meetings, they ignore meetings and events that involve other countries, but dealing with the same issues from a different perspective. It is this perspective that the Western media does not want Westerners to know on a mass scale. One such meeting just took place over the last couple of days, involving a group that has been in existence for several years now. Back in May of 2015, an article appeared on the Geopolitics.co website, reporting the creation of a new alliance that appeared ready, able, and willing to stand up to the U.S. NATO Khazarian hegemony in the world. One article on the 2nd of May, 2015, wrote that there's a military coalition that is standing up against the perennial bully in the schoolyard, meaning U.S. NATO military forces. It's referenced via its annual defense ministers meeting, meaning the Moscow Conference on International Security, or MCIS, and its close cooperation is led by the mighty triumvirate of Russia, China, and Iran. Another article on the same website the next day added that the Eurasian economic and military integrations have never been accelerated this way before. The natural symbiotic abilities to supply one another in terms of resources and technologies have never been exploited and satisfied in the Eurasian sphere in this manner in ages. Russia has already ratified the 100 billion AIIB, which will provide much-needed funds for Asian infrastructure development, in line with the One Belt, One Road economic integration program. This is, of course, a far cry to the World Bank IMF budget allocations for the region, and far more respectable than the U.S.-led TPP economic integration, which prioritizes only the welfare of big corporations to the effective surrender of sovereignty of member nations. What the Western mainstream media were neglecting, on top of so many other things, was that according to this article, the whole Eurasian continent is undergoing a comprehensive military integration using Russian, Indian, Chinese, and Iranian military capabilities, with close strategic cooperation from Southeast Asian nations, including the Philippines. While the West was still trying to push war and force its agenda upon Syria, at least during the time when these two articles were written last year, it is pretty clear now the West is no longer getting its way, and there is a united force that is standing up to it. The Ukraine coup has been a dismal Western failure, and Russia cleaned up the remnants of Daesh in Syria, restoring the democratically elected leadership in Syria, something that the U.S. was unable to do, but more importantly, openly unwilling to do. This alliance, a nightmare to the likes of the U.S. and NATO, is the Moscow Conference on International Security, MCIS. The previously unknown conference has been gaining greater attention, especially given the threats being imposed by the U.S., the EU, Western countries, and the Khazarian Mafia worldwide. It has been the actions of these groups that have forced nations and people who have traditionally not been interested in military aggression to act to preserve wherever possible and restore, if necessary, a balance of global stability against a group desperately bent on stealing power and control away from the West. Geopolitics.co reported on the MCIS for 2016 on April 27th. The two-day event took place in Moscow, and according to the article, aside from the ongoing effort to crash the old financial system, security experts and authorities from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, Middle East countries, China, and Russia are having a conference on global security and threats of terrorism. For the Global Resistance Group, terrorism pertains to the genocidal Khazarian mafia at large. The article notes some of the key issues to be addressed during the conference as being distinctive features of contemporary terrorism, stabilization efforts in the Middle East, exploiting terrorist organizations to achieve foreign policy goals, color revolutions as a key factor in the outburst of global terrorist activity, the role of ASEAN mechanisms of strengthening security in the Asia-Pacific, the role of the international cooperation in countering traditional and emerging security challenges, a new security system in Europe, and defense cooperation on maintaining security in Afghanistan and Central Asia. If one may be wondering whether this alliance can carry any real weight in terms of global power, the article notes in conclusion by writing that previous MCIS conferences led to Russia's armed intervention in Syria, which proved to be a real game changer. With BRICS leading the way in terms of implementing geoeconomic actions to take down the global cabal, the MCIS appears to be the military arm for enforcement and protection. If last year's conference did help establish the justification and support that allowed Russia to intervene in Syria, then it will be interesting to note what possible actions may be forthcoming as a result of this year's conference, and, given the incredible push that the global cabal appears to be making at this time in what some might consider a last gasp for life. In this week's Mohawk Initiative update, it is one thing for leaders to claim that they want one thing, while acting in a way that offers the illusion that the leader is acting on it, but in reality is merely creating another channel by which the illusion can be marketed and consented to, without the people involved being any more aware of what happened. Such has been the case over the last 100 years at least, and arguably for much longer than this. One of the illusions has been the criminally fraudulent system of fiat banking with its money created out of thin air policies. Another has been the illusion of the criminally corrupt and fraudulent system of commercial law that is practiced in Canada and around the world, treating everyone and everything as a corporate entity, so that commercial rules can be applied to everyone for the profit of corporations and the global elites. Another of the bigger illusions, the illusion that has allowed the other illusions to play themselves out, is the illusion of democracy. This belief that the people have been given that their vote actually and truly means something, when history has now taught us that this is just simply not the case. I'll return to the issue and the illusion of democracy coming up in a few more minutes. It's when people become more informed about the corruptions and the enslavement that have been imposed upon them all that they begin to start asking very uncomfortable and very inconvenient questions of those in power, seeking accountability and seeking action. The problem and the challenge is that many politicians themselves have no concept of the bigger picture of what is happening in the world, and the odds are even greater still that those same people have no idea about the bigger picture of the nature of the human and planetary shifts taking place at this time and the meaning of it all. They are afraid to act for one of two reasons. One, they either do know at some level what is going on and they are being bribed or threatened to continue to pull the cabal line, or two, they are blissfully yet sadly ignorant to all that is going on, and they get overwhelmed with the amount of information that informed people are throwing at them. Information that they have not had time to learn because they have been too busy learning information that is relevant to keeping them in a job that depends upon them being ignorant and ill-informed. At some point, however, if the people have genuinely and peacefully attempted to reach out and seek involvement and engagement from the leadership, and the leadership is unable and or unwilling to engage, a point comes when the people may have to choose to take issues to the next level. And this gets a bit tricky because the global cabal is actively seeking violent conflict now. So people have to consider carefully the consequences of what steps of action can be taken so as to avoid giving the cabal-controlled police forces the justification they want to use force, while still getting the issues addressed that need to be addressed. Within the Mohawk community, and as we are witnessing worldwide, people are beginning to approach that infamous red line, where something more drastic must be done when all sincere and peaceful options have been exhausted. It was back on March 16th in a Canadian press article appearing on the cbc.ca website that reported that Aboriginal gangs are proliferating across Canada as criminal organizations exploit the intense poverty and squalid conditions of First Nations communities, says a top officer with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's Aboriginal Police Division. The gangs' stock in trade includes drug distribution, prostitution, and theft, and they're only growing more sophisticated, said the RCMP. The gangs are brought on by poverty, said RCMP Sergeant Merle Carpenter, who holds the Aboriginal gangs file with the National Aboriginal Policing Services. They intimidate by violence, and these Aboriginal youth are just wanting to belong to somebody. The vast majority of uninformed people would very likely have just blamed it on the Indigenous people and supported all police methods to incarcerate them. When I was young, I was guilty of doing exactly that, because my school never properly educated us on corporate entities and how governments made treaties, put groups of Indigenous people onto reservations, limited their access to the rest of the world, destroyed their traditional hunting grounds, rendering them unable to survive according to their natural ways, and then blaming them for lashing out at what we have done to them. The RCMP treat them as inferiors, and the Indigenous have been used as an outlet and target for certain members of police forces that are psychologically unstable and looking for ways to use violence and abuse the power placed in them. The court system sees them as commercial entities to be exploited, and even more so in the years since multinational and major national corporations started unlawfully expropriating or stealing lands that were deeded to them. The CBC article continues. Observers say the explosive growth in gangs can't be combated unless the federal government steps up and addresses the woeful conditions underlying the startling trend. It's so simple that it's hard to understand why nothing's happening, said Steve Copty, an Aboriginal social worker who spent several years working in the mental health field for 21 reserves in Ontario's Northwest. It's all about education and employment. If we don't get youth educated and we don't get them participating in the workforce, we're going to continue to watch this deterioration. Copty has been sold the same line that the missionaries were told when they arrived here, that the Indigenous had to be converted to the ways of the white man, lest they continue to be known as savages. History has shown who the real savages were, and the savagery of the corporate entities controlling Canada was not only open and blatant, but it was also sneaky, underhanded, and done without the knowing and informed democratic consent of anyone involved. The same has been done to the people of most, if not all, Western nations. It is also important for me to state that just because I am using this particular Canadian example, the same practice is in place across Canada and even around the world, so it is not unique. This week, in what will seem confusing, even to those who have been following the Mohawk initiative, energies of tension are beginning to rise. but unfortunately there may be negative consequences to the naturally free wolf, bear, and turtle Mohawk clans in the Grand River area. Even if one does not understand it fully, it is important to at least be aware that there are both corporate Mohawk entities and naturally free Mohawk Indigenous clans existing in the Grand River Brantford area. The entity that is currently recognized by the Canadian corporate government is a corporate entity called the Six Nations. The Six Nations consist of an elected band council representing, I am told, less than 10% of the population of Mohawks on the Haldimand lands. This entity has been claiming to speak on behalf of even the naturally free Mohawks, the wolf, turtle, and bear clans. This is at least partly why the chiefs of these three clans are not being acknowledged at this time in their land claims, nor their pursuit to be paid back of stolen historical debts. It has led to a fracture within the Mohawk Nation, and it could be argued that this was intended so that the naturally free members of remaining clans could be driven into submission. The true and natural chiefs are not being listened to because they are perceived as not having received the acknowledgement of the government in order to get anything accomplished. Yet, even this is not exactly working. Nanda Garlow, in a Two-Row Times article on April 27th, has reported that Robert Aaron Detlor is a Canadian lawyer from Toronto, Ontario, who has been representing the Haudenosaunee citizens of the Six Nations of the Grand River via the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council, the HCCC, and the Haudenosaunee Development Institute, HDI, since 2007. Detlor was evicted from Six Nations in a community-led action Tuesday morning. This follows almost an entire year of accusations and evidence raised by Haudenosaunee citizens at Six Nations, saying Detlor has been misrepresenting their interests. It starts to get confusing here, but this is why Indigenous worldwide have been able to be controlled. If I am understanding this situation correctly, I believe it goes something like this. The Canadian government recognizes only legitimate corporate bands. The Six Nations has this recognition and are claiming this, according to that recognition, under criminally fraudulent commercial law. This entity is operating under the illusion that they have the support of all Mohawks, including those that have not surrendered their rights, freedoms, or their lands to the corporate entities. The Mohawks, following the Six Nations, have been sold the illusion that the Canadian government is truly committed to their interests. The HDI is a corporate entity that is allegedly screwing the corporate entity known as the Six Nations. The Six Nations are crying foul, and now the members of a men's group in the Six Nations have forcefully removed the lawyer Detlor from the HDI offices, triggering a potentially violent confrontation that involves only the corporate entities and not the naturally free clans within the same region. There is a natural conflict of interest here. The Canadian government deals with corporate entities that have lawyers. Lawyers are those called to serve the British Accreditation Registry, or BAR, and thus have no loyalty to anything other than corporate interests. Having a bar lawyer to represent a corporate Indigenous entity, and expecting that lawyer to honorably serve the interests of Mohawk people, is similar to putting a fox in a chicken coop and asking the fox to guard the chickens. It isn't going to happen, at least not honorably. The illusion is that the Men's Council and members of all Indigenous nations that have surrendered their rights and freedoms all believe, either rightly or wrongly, that they are acting in the interests of their people, and the government has marketed one particular illusion that these bands have become dependent upon or addicted to. They are fighting for the so-called right to continue receiving privileges as corporate slaves that they should be receiving as naturally free humans. It is the same for most humans around the world. We defend, sometimes violently, our right to be slaves within a system that gives us the illusion that we are free. The expression is therefore correct in that none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe that they are free. Given all the actions lately by the Grand River Mohawks to reassert their power, it could raise some questions of suspicion as to why the corporate entities are suddenly active with actions that could be interpreted by the media and the public as hostile. Last week, it was reported that Mohawks were involved in the occupation of the offices of the Ministry for Indigenous and Northern Affairs in Toronto. This week, Mohawks are reported as taking violent action against a lawyer. This lawyer has the protection, still, of the Law Society of Upper Canada. And it just so happens that this is the same Law Society that is one of the debtors to the Grand River Mohawks for historical debt repayment. Therefore, there are grounds to suspect that there are people conspiring to cause trouble with the intent of discrediting the legitimate Mohawk claims by giving greater attention to the actions of some Mohawks who do not represent the vast majority of Mohawks in the region. Spokesperson for the Mohawk workers, Bill Squire, reported last week that they are not able to control all the members and their actions because the legitimate chiefs have been publicly shunned by government and the media. This is why the Mohawk Initiative is becoming so much more important at this time. And as time goes on, hopefully the CVN listeners will come to understand the great significance that this story is going to represent for Indigenous people, not only in Canada, but also worldwide. Another example occurred this week in Saskatoon, a city in the Canadian province of Saskatchewan. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited a school there to speak with children. Ryan Maloney, reporting for the Huffington Post on April 27th, writes that a high school student in Saskatoon put Prime Minister Trudeau on the spot Wednesday by asking how he will right the wrongs faced by Canada's Indigenous peoples, including third world living conditions and acts of genocide. A CBC video posted in YouTube covered this exchange.
My name is Tara Bear. There have been a total of 23 elected prime ministers in Canada. Treaty 6 was signed August 23rd, 1876 at Fort Carlton, Saskatchewan. How do you intend to honor the promises your ancestors made with mine, exactly written in all the signed treaties across Canada, to make up and pay for the acts of genocide our ancestors were subject to, long before and after the signing of Treaty 6? And how do you, Justin, with all your politicians and representatives, plan to right the wrongs the past 22 elected prime ministers have failed? My ancestors helped you once in your time of need, and when they first came to this land, now Canada, are we not considered Canadians as well? If we are, why do you allow the first people of this land to endure and live in third world conditions?
Thank you very much for your question, Tara, and it goes to the heart of what it is we need to do, and that's why I instructed every single one of my ministers, regardless of what their responsibility was, that they need to understand that the most important relationship we have as a federal government is a relationship with Indigenous peoples. What we have to start doing is recognizing first and foremost that the federal government can't fix this. We can't fix it on our own. Everything the federal government has tried to do over the past centuries, some of it very well-meaning, but horribly wrong in its consequences, happened to Indigenous peoples. And the future that we have to build will be with Indigenous peoples, going back to, as you point out, the very core and essence of the original treaty relationship, of the original relationships, which was built on respect, openness, shared responsibility, shared stewardship, partnership that has been completely removed from the discourse right now. But I will highlight one thing, that for all my commitment to renewing this relationship, I wouldn't be Prime Minister right now if it wasn't for the fact that the people who've been pushing incredibly hard to fix and renew this relationship properly include non-Indigenous people across this country. Canadians right across this country have been asking and demanding that we fix this relationship because, quite frankly, as you point out, this is a stain and a scar upon not just our sense of who we are and our morality as Canadians, but on the kind of country we need to be building wherein everyone has a real and fair chance of success, where your opportunity to succeed is just as great, or in your case, greater than your average students across this country, where you are going to be able to shine and contribute and shape the future as much as everyone else and possibly more. That's what we have to do, and that's why talking about renewing the relationship, nation-to-nation relationship, respect, openness, collaboration, working together. Yes, the federal government has a lot of work to do, but Indigenous Canadians have a lot of work to do as well, and doing it together in the same direction is going to be how we get through it, but also recognizing that the $8.4 billion over 5 years is just a start. It's a good start, but this is going to take many more years and many more billions of dollars to fix a relationship that has been broken for centuries, as you point out.
Personally, I take exception to Trudeau's comments that the government cannot fix this alone, and that it is going to take many more billions of taxpayer dollars. He states that the government, Indigenous nations, and Canadians must work together, but he refuses to acknowledge the external forces that hijack and enslave governance worldwide, and this is the global banking cabal and its many factions. Considering the fact that Trudeau has yet to acknowledge the leaders of the naturally free Indigenous nations across the country, this raises some doubt as to the sincerity of Trudeau's desire to work with Indigenous people, but instead only work with the corporate entities who are already under enslavement anyway. The Government of Canada could very easily fix the Indigenous situation by allowing Indigenous groups to grow hemp and begin selling it, while creating all kinds of new industries that hemp is already well known for. There are very cheap and very easy solutions that could be implemented, but it is not in the best interests of governments nor of corporate entities to allow this. Specifically related to the Mohawk Initiative, however, I have been given permission to report this week that a late letter has been received in the office of the Wolf Clan Chief, Olelegoa, from the Attorney General of Canada, Jody Wilson-Raybould. This letter suggests to the Mohawks that the issue has been handed over to the minister responsible, Dr. Carolyn Bennett. Meetings are currently in the process of being negotiated, and a further update is expected next week. In the meantime, Mohawk worker spokesperson Bill Squire informs CVN that he would like to reaffirm his message from last week, stating that the naturally free Wolf, Turtle, and Bear Mohawk clans do not seek any kind of physical confrontation with the government or the people at this time. They are not involved with, nor do they support any Mohawk activity being undertaken by the Mohawk corporate entities and individuals acting under their direction and jurisdiction. They do seek to reclaim their lands and their stolen funds, and if this can be done honorably through a Truth and Reconciliation meeting, then this is the preferred course of action. Having said this, however, if it turns out that the government is not prepared to act honorably, then more forceful actions may become necessary, although every intention will be made to minimize impact upon Canadians who are not directly involved. Coming up shortly, a bit of a lesson on what reality is, or might be, according to those perceiving it. In a few quick headlines for this week, it appears that all the fuss people are making about the U.S. presidential election appears to be doing the right thing for the general public, but perhaps not the right thing for the global cabal, unless the global cabal is trying to start a violent confrontation, which cannot be ruled out. An article appearing on RT on April 27th notes that as far as this election is concerned, people in the U.S. and around the world are beginning to observe and witness firsthand that the U.S. electoral system is rigged. According to the article, the poll, conducted by Reuters and Ipsos, found that some 51% of voters believe the primary system is rigged against certain candidates. Some 71% said they would prefer to pick their party's presidential nominee with a direct vote, cutting out the use of delegates as intermediaries. The survey also found that 27% of likely voters do not understand how the primary process works, and 44% do not understand why delegates are involved at all. Nearly half said they would prefer a single-day primary in which all states held their nominating contests together, as opposed to the current system which draws the process out for months. The responses were about the same for both Republicans and Democrats. The article adds that according to Reuters, the process isn't as straightforward as it seems. The complexity lies in the use of delegates, party members who are assigned to support candidates at their conventions, usually based on voting results. The individual parties decide how delegates are awarded in each state, with Democrats and Republicans having different rules. And when the race is too close to call, the delegates' personal opinions can come into play, much to the dismay of voters seeking a simpler system. Another controversial element to the system is that each state has different rules about whether voters must be registered as party members to participate. So, despite all the attachment to the dramas being played out, it does seem that the drama is serving to help make people painfully aware of what they have been trying to deny for decades, that their system is not as wonderful as they have been bragging to the world, and that it is, in fact, as corrupt, and arguably even more so, than other systems that the U.S. itself has been criticizing historically. Exploring the difference between a democracy and a republic will be coming up shortly. There are no doubt many listeners who have been observing all the earthquake and volcanic activity that has been taking place over the last little while. It is becoming more than abundantly clear that something very real and something very physical is taking place within the structure of our planet. And the big question remains as to what all this activity will lead to and how it will play out in the overall shift that has yet to take place on this planet. Many listeners will be familiar with a source known as Dutch Since. Dutch Since has been monitoring and reporting on earthquake activity via his blog for at least a few years now, I believe. In a posting on his blog during the past week, Dutch Since offers what he believes is the inescapable proof that earthquakes are in fact connected over long distances. Given the activity around the Ring of Fire, there is at least one part of the plate that has yet to significantly react to all the other activity, and this is the part of the plate located in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S.-Canada. Dutch Since writes that a week ago, after the back-to-back 7.0 earthquakes across the Pacific, professionals denied that earthquakes are related across the plate. I, Dutch Since, chastised them last week for denying the obvious. Now we are seeing the same thing occur again, back-to-back 7.0 earthquakes on each side of the Pacific within hours of each other. Earthquakes are related over a distance, and professionals were wrong to deny this connection. He adds that it is now proved that earthquake progression is occurring across vast distances in short periods of time. Earthquakes are related. One earthquake can cause another similar magnitude earthquake elsewhere, sometimes very far away, and that earthquakes can indeed be forecast if you take these factors into account. The week before, Dutch Since posted an article offering an introduction to understanding how earthquake progression works and how pressure is transferred across tectonic plates. Listeners who have been unfamiliar with the work of Dutch Since and who are interested in learning more about all this geological activity may find his website and blog meaningful and informative. Links will be in the show summary. Finally, last week's CVN reported a story that offered background information on the history of the Khazarian Jews. One listener very kindly wrote to me, sharing that this listener was of Jewish ancestry and felt that the story was a bit harsh, and offered a link to another story that also offers some information on the history of the Ashkenazi Jews. For any new listeners, I want to be clear that I am not targeting any message or agenda on any one or any group. As we explore the greater humanity history, we are going to no doubt find that certain groups have been particularly bad to the rest of humanity. I offer perspectives that address many groups, and I am careful to also include the countries and governments that are a part of my own upbringing. I own what my birth country, Canada, has done to the Indigenous groups on this land, and I own what they are participating in globally, either directly or indirectly, that is harming humanity and our planet. The link will appear in the show summary for those who are seeking to learn more about the Ashkenazi Jewish history in order to become more informed when asking questions or challenging leadership if the need arises. Thanks to this listener, whose name I won't mention as I have not received permission to do so. In general news, earlier in the Mohawk Initiative update, I said I would return to this illusion of democracy. It is becoming increasingly important to understand the system that has been marketed and sold to the world that has been called democracy, and how democracy, like all other incarnations of societal governance over centuries, has become corrupt and dysfunctional. It has been said that every society that has risen up through history has within it the seeds of its own destruction. The predominant seed that grows this destruction is arguably human greed for power, control, and wealth. An opinion article by Pepe Escobar, appearing on the Sputnik News website on April 29th, notes the following about democracy. Noam Chomsky has noted that support for formal democracy in the West is dwindling because they are not real democracies. All major decisions affecting the EU are taken by unelected Eurocrats in Brussels. Escobar's article is focused on the increasing turbulence taking place on the geopolitical and geoeconomic levels. All of this, and much, much more, is serving to wake up a global population that is tired of being controlled, and they are no longer choosing to live like sheep, and are choosing instead to become informed, empowered, and to stand with increasingly larger numbers of their brothers and sisters worldwide to call for change. A change that has the global elites utterly terrified. Yet, there is still the illusion of democracy for many. Many believe so strongly in the illusion that they will defend it as true reality, even to the point of violence, to sustain that belief. Recently, an audio clip crossed my path of an exchange between an audience participant and Daryl Anka. Anka is known for his channeling of an entity called Bashar. In this exchange, Bashar attempts to help inform a man of what democracy has become, and, at least initially, the man is resistant in acknowledging what is and what could be.
All you need to do is, in a positive, constructive, and loving way, act like it to the best of your ability, which I know you are doing. So the point simply is the more of you that do that, then those that, shall we say, use the manipulation system will no longer find themselves with any footing eventually. Our old systems will just collapse, but the new systems will be in place. It's not about changing the old system. It's about having new systems in place that represent what you prefer, so that when the old systems collapse, the new systems will be ready to go.
Well, one alternative for a new system for anyone who's listening is truedemocracynow.com and realvoting.org. And the concept is real simple for us to take back our government.
Not take back.
For us to be our government.
Thank you. That is all you need to do in any creative way that you deem appropriate for the expression of who you are in truth.
To restore democracy. To restore
That's
democracy.
all you need to do. Remember. You are not really restoring democracy. You're just changing how you use it. Because you're using democracy to support what you say you don't want.
No, but it's not democracy.
Yes, it is. Because in actual fact, you don't want democracy. You want a republic.
No,
Yes.
Personally, I want democracy.
No. You want a republic. A republic can use democratic methods, but you actually don't want a democracy. Because when you have a democracy, this is what can happen.
No, a democracy is when the will of the majority is what's carried out.
That's what you've been taught to believe. If you do a little more research, you'll actually find that's not so.
That's what I feel a true democracy is. That would be my
You're going
definition.
off a definition. And I won't argue the definition with you. But the point is you're going off a definition that actually has been misinterpreted. A democracy is that which allows for an unlimited majority to rule, but absolutely provides no basis for the protection of individual or minority rights. A republic allows there to be a democratic process of voting, but through a constitution imposes controls on the majority to allow for individual and minority rights. Now, which do you prefer?
Honestly, I think I prefer true democracy.
I have just told you the difference.
Right.
So you are saying that you are in favor of an unlimited majority with absolutely no regard for individual or minority rights?
Yes.
Why?
Because the will of the people should be the will of the planet.
But you see, the idea is the will of the people are expressed in a constitution, not in a majority system.
Well, if the Constitution were upheld, then that might make sense. But since the Constitution isn't upheld under the Republic, then the Republic isn't working.
The Republic doesn't work when it is replaced by a pure majority democracy. And that's what has happened.
No, because if our system were working as a democracy, the situations that we're in right now, we wouldn't be in because it's not the will of the majority.
The situation, however, that you are missing is that the structure, the form of government called a democracy is what allows for the continuation of what you don't want. The form of government called the republic is the only way to bring to light how the republic has been misrepresented. You cannot, as your Einstein said, solve a problem from the same level in which the problem was created.
That makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels to me right now. It really does. It's really
do a little bit more of your own research, and you will see that just because there may be corruption in a republic that allows there to be a misrepresentation doesn't mean that you abandon the idea itself. It simply means that you need to educate people to go back to it, which a democracy will not allow you to do.
As the planetary energies continue to rise and as human consciousness also continues to evolve, many are being led to expand their awareness of what is currently perceived as reality. Not everyone is ready for this, so I will not go into great detail. However, an article appearing on the Minds.com website on April 26th shares that cognitive sciences professor Donald Hoffman of the University of California, Irvine campus gave a speech to a TED conference on the proof that the reality we see is just what our brains are programmed to interpret as reality. Arguably, one example of this could be how North Americans were brainwashed for over a decade to believe that 9/11 was a true case of international terrorism against the U.S., instead of an elaborately designed false flag operation, given extensive media coverage and oversaturation to drive home the message that was intended to be marketed to the people. Hoffman's speech was about 20 minutes long, but I'll offer about 8 to 10 minutes or so of the key information.
Fascinated by the greatest unsolved mystery in science. It's about who we are, and I can't help but be curious. Science has learned a lot about brain activity, but the relationship between brain activity and conscious experiences is still a mystery. Why have we made so little progress? That we can't solve this problem because we lack the necessary concepts and intelligence. I think we've simply made a false assumption. Once we fix it, we just might solve this problem. Today I'd like to tell you what that assumption is, why it's false, and how to fix it. Let's begin with a question. Do we see reality as it is, I open my eyes and I have an experience that I describe as a red tomato a meter away. As a result, I come to believe that in reality, there's a red tomato a meter away. I then close my eyes and my experience changes to a gray field. But is it still the case that in reality, there's a red tomato a meter away? I think so, but could I be wrong? Could I be misinterpreting the nature of my perceptions? We've misinterpreted our perceptions before. We used to think the Earth is flat because it looks that way. Pythagoras discovered that we were wrong. Then we thought that the Earth is the unmoving center of the universe, again because it looks that way. Copernicus and Galileo discovered, again, that we were wrong. Galileo then wondered if we might be misinterpreting our experiences in other ways. He wrote, "I think that tastes, odors, colors, and so on reside in consciousness. Hence, if the living creature were removed, all these qualities would be annihilated." Now that's a stunning claim. Could Galileo be right? Could we really be misinterpreting our experiences that badly? Well, neuroscientists tell us that about a third of the brain's cortex is engaged in vision. When you simply open your eyes and look about this room, billions of neurons and trillions of synapses are engaged. So the eye is like a 130 megapixel camera. What are these neurons up to? Well, neuroscientists tell us that they're creating in real time all the shapes, objects, colors, and motions that we see. We don't construct the whole world at once. We construct what we need in the moment. In this example, you see glowing blue bars with pretty sharp edges moving across a field of dots. In fact, no dots move. All I'm doing from frame to frame is changing the colors of dots from blue to black or black to blue. But when I do this quickly, your visual system creates the glowing blue bars with the sharp edges and the motion. One textbook says, for example, evolutionarily speaking, vision is useful precisely because it's so accurate. So the idea is that accurate perceptions are fitter perceptions. They give you a survival advantage. Now, is this correct? Is this the right interpretation of evolutionary theory? Well, let's first look at a couple examples in nature. The Australian jewel beetle is dimpled, glossy, and brown. The female is flightless. The male flies, looking, of course, for a hot female. When he finds one, he alights and mates. There's another species in the outback, Homo sapiens. The male of this species has a massive brain that he uses to hunt for cold beer. And when he finds one, he drains it and sometimes throws the bottle into the outback. Now, as it happens, these bottles are dimpled, glossy, and just the right shade of brown to tickle the fancy of these beetles. The males swarm all over the bottles trying to mate. They lose all interest in the real females. The species almost went extinct. Australia had to change its bottles to save its beetles. Now, the males had successfully found females for thousands, perhaps millions of years. It looked like they saw reality as it is. Even when crawling all over the bottle, the male couldn't discover his mistake. So this raises an important technical question. Does natural selection really favor seeing reality as it is? Evolution is a mathematically precise theory. We can use the equations of evolution to check this out. We can have various organisms or artificial worlds compete and see which survive and which thrive, which sensory systems are more fit. A key notion in those equations is fitness. Consider this steak. What does this steak do for the fitness of an animal? For a hungry lion looking to eat, it enhances fitness. For a well-fed lion looking to mate, it doesn't enhance fitness. And for a rabbit in any state, it doesn't enhance fitness. So fitness does depend on reality as it is, yes, but also on the organism, its state, and its action. Fitness is not the same thing as reality as it is, and it's fitness and not reality as it is that figures centrally in the equations of evolution. In my lab, we have run hundreds of thousands of evolutionary game simulations with lots of different randomly chosen worlds and organisms that compete for resources in those worlds. Some of the organisms see all of the reality, others see just part of the reality, and some see none of the reality, only fitness. Who wins? Well, I hate to break it to you, but perception of reality goes extinct. In almost every simulation, organisms that see none of reality but are just tuned to fitness drive to extinction all the organisms that perceive reality as it is. So the bottom line is evolution does not favor veridical or accurate perceptions. Those perceptions of reality go extinct. We need some help with our intuitions. How can not perceiving reality as it is be useful? Well, fortunately, we have a very helpful metaphor. The desktop interface on your computer. Consider that blue icon for a TED Talk that you're writing. Now, the icon is blue and rectangular and in the lower right corner of the desktop. Does that mean that the text file itself in the computer is blue, rectangular, and in the lower right-hand corner of the computer? Of course not. Anyone who thought that misinterprets the purpose of the interface. It's not there to show you the reality of the computer. In fact, it's there to hide that reality. You don't want to know about the diodes and resistors and all the megabytes of software. If you had to deal with that, you could never write your text file or edit your photo. So the idea is that evolution has given us an interface that hides reality and guides adaptive behavior. Space and time, as you perceive them right now, are your desktop. Physical objects are simply icons in that desktop. There's an obvious objection. Hoffman, if you think that train coming down the track at 200 miles an hour is just an icon of your desktop, why don't you step in front of it? And after you're gone and your theory with you, we'll know that there's more to that train than just an icon. Well, I wouldn't step in front of that train for the same reason that I wouldn't carelessly drag that icon to the trash can. Not because I take the icon literally. The file is not literally blue or rectangular, but I do take it seriously. I could lose weeks of work. Similarly, evolution has shaped us with perceptual symbols that are designed to keep us alive. We better take them seriously. If you see a snake, don't pick it up. If you see a cliff, don't jump off. They're designed to keep us safe, and we should take them seriously. That does not mean that we should take them literally. That's a logical error. When I have a perceptual experience that I describe as a brain or neurons, I am interacting with reality. But that reality is not a brain or neurons, and it's nothing like a brain or neurons. And that reality, whatever it is the real source of cause and effect in the world. Not brains, not neurons. Brains and neurons have no causal powers. They cause none of our perceptual experiences and none of our behavior. Brains and neurons are a species-specific set of symbols, a hack. What does this mean for the mystery of consciousness? Well, it opens up new possibilities. For instance, perhaps reality is some vast interacting network of conscious agents, simple and complex, that cause each other's conscious experiences. Actually, this isn't as crazy an idea as it seems, and I'm currently exploring it. But here's the point. Once we let go of our massively intuitive but massively false assumption about the nature of reality, it opens up new ways to think about life's greatest mystery. I bet that reality will end up turning out to be more fascinating and unexpected than we'd ever imagined.
I remind the skeptics that Hoffman's message is not just some New Age fluff or some kind of esoteric, unsubstantiated message. He is an accomplished scientist and professor, and he is among many exploring more of the quantum nature of what we perceive as reality, and it is an argument based on science. I'd like to replay one small part of what Hoffman said.
Organisms that see none of reality but are just tuned to fitness drive to extinction all the organisms that perceive reality as it is. So the bottom line is evolution does not favor veridical or accurate perceptions. Those perceptions of reality go extinct.
What I believe I am hearing in that statement is this. Keeping in mind that the steak for a hungry lion means nothing to the well-fed lion seeking a mate, and also that the same steak means nothing to a rabbit, it means that fitness becomes a variable term that can be uniquely applied according to the state of the lion, the rabbit, or the human in any particular moment. Therefore, fitness, as it has been determined by the global cabal, is based on power, control, and wealth. Therefore, assuming Hoffman's simulations are correct, those who are only focused on fitness, or in this case, the fulfilling of power, control, and wealth, then this means that the rest of the organisms who perceive reality as it is are driven to extinction. We are witnessing this in the acts of the cabal as they seek to destroy the planet for profit, power, and greed, and in the process are destroying all the systems that sustain life upon this planet. Reality is an illusion perceived by each individual according to his or her uniquely different yet equally beautiful characteristics and identity. And each individual is given a series of hacks for helping one to survive in any moment of now. However, it is of course up to each individual to determine what is real or what is truth for her or himself. For those wanting to listen to the full presentation, the full video and links will appear in the show summary for this story. Over to science-related news now. Following on the story earlier that Donald Hoffman suggesting that our reality is only what our unique and respective brains are perceiving it to be, another article has surfaced suggesting that, according to a quantum experiment, time, as humans have currently known it, has never existed. Now, this may not be much of a surprise to most listeners. An article on the CosmicScientist.com website on March 25th has reported that in 2012, U.S. National Medal of Science Award winner Yakir Aharonov, who is regarded as one of the world's leading quantum theorists, published a paper in Nature Physics showing that the present is constrained by the past and the future. This means that what happens in the present can depend on what happened in the future, which makes no sense, as quantum physics rarely does. It also means that what happened in the past can affect the present. Seems strange, doesn't it? It's definitely something hard to wrap your head around. The article continues. There is another groundbreaking, weird experiment that also has tremendous implications for understanding the nature of our reality. More specifically, the nature of what we call time. It's known as the delayed choice experiment, or quantum eraser, and it can be considered a modified version of the double slit experiment. To understand the delayed choice experiment, one has to understand the quantum double slit experiment. And in the show summary, I will post the video that explains the double slit experiment for those wishing to review it. The article continues. This quantum uncertainty is defined as the ability, according to the quantum mechanic laws that govern subatomic affairs, of a particle like an electron to exist in a murky state of possibility, to be anywhere, everywhere, or nowhere at all, until clicked into substantiality by a laboratory detector or an eyeball, meaning it has been observed. According to physicist Andrew Truscott, lead researcher from a study published by the Australian National University, the experiment suggests that reality does not exist unless we are looking at it. It suggests that we are living in a holographic type of universe. Just as the double slit experiment illustrates how factors associated with consciousness collapse the quantum wave function, meaning a piece of matter existing in multiple potential states, into a single piece of matter with defined physical properties, no longer a wave, all those potential states collapsed into one. The delayed choice experiment illustrates how what happens in the present can change what happens or happened in the past. It also shows how time can go backwards, how cause and effect can be reversed, and how the future caused the past. Like the quantum double slit experiment, the delayed choice quantum eraser has been demonstrated and repeated time and again. For example, physicists at the Australian National University have conducted John Wheeler's delayed choice thought experiment. The findings were recently published in the journal Nature Physics. The article attempts to explain at a more cosmic level by asking us to imagine a star emitting a photon billions of years ago, heading in the direction of planet Earth. In between, there is a galaxy. As a result of what's known as gravitational lensing, the light will have to bend around the galaxy in order to reach Earth. So it has to take one of two paths, go left or go right. Billions of years later, if one decides to set up an apparatus to catch the photon, the resulting pattern would be, as explained above in the double-slit experiment, an interference pattern. This demonstrates that the photon took one way and it took the other way. One could also choose to peek at the incoming photon, setting up a telescope on each side of the galaxy to determine which side the photon took to reach Earth. The very act of measuring or watching which way the photon comes in means it can only come in from one side. The pattern will no longer be an interference pattern representing multiple possibilities, but a single clump pattern showing one way. What does this mean? It means how we choose to measure now, this moment of now, affects what direction the photon took billions of years ago. Our choice in the present moment affected what had already happened in the past. This makes absolutely no sense, which is a common phenomenon when it comes to quantum physics. Regardless of our ability to make sense of it, it's real. This experiment also suggests that quantum entanglement, which has also been verified, exists regardless of time, meaning two bits of matter can actually be entangled, again, in time. Time, as we measure it and know it, doesn't really exist. Now, given the mind-blowing complexity of this, most listeners may not even be able to grasp the significance of this just yet. That is perfectly okay. I'm not even sure I am fully grasping it. However, by sharing the story, what it does is begin planting the seeds that all the concepts humans have previously understood and accepted as real are now being questioned, and humans are embarking on what could and will likely be an evolutionary jump in consciousness as we currently know it. One does not have to understand it or even believe it at this time, but merely be open to future possibilities. In this week's final words, I would like to offer something for the crowd who are interested in the more, shall I call it, esoteric information about this human and planetary shift in consciousness that we are all going through. For those who are not exactly interested but have an open mind to consider new information, your choice to continue listening is appreciated, and it is understood that the information offered may or may not feel true for everyone in this current moment of now. We have been experiencing a number of astrological alignments over the past year or so that have brought with them energies that some will instinctively know have contributed to the seemingly wild events over the last year. We are apparently in another such period, with what some are calling a once-in-a-decade event of 5 planets in our solar system being in retrograde, a term meaning that the planets are behind the sun, and, from our earthly perspective, it seems like they are going backwards, although in reality they are not. Growth and change are currently being experienced from the larger macrocosmic level, being our universe and beyond, but it is also happening at the microcosmic cellular levels within our bodies. As a result, this means, by default, that energetic and cosmic change is taking place on all levels in between. I mentioned earlier in the Mohawk Initiative update about the energies of tension beginning to rise up in many. These final words will, at least partly, begin to address this phenomenon being experienced by many. I'd like to note 2 articles, first by Dana Merkich. Her first article on April 18th addresses growth and change, and she writes that growth and change always require stepping out of our comfort zones, letting go of what is safe and familiar, and usually moving into the unknown. She describes a bit of her personal life and how she went into various opportunities only to discover that she had strong feelings of not belonging in those opportunities. One begins to learn that one is getting closer to one's purpose in being here by courageously stepping out into the unknown to experience not only the things that one may not like, but more specifically to discover the things that one does like, as opposed to just remaining stagnant in one's job, one's relation with others, or even one's lack of relations with others, and more. Merkich writes, with each uncertain transition from one chapter to the next, your faith muscles build. The fear lessens, because you realize that the day-to-day reality of change is more doable and manageable than your fears make it out to be. It takes strength and determination to keep growing, letting go, trusting. Growing, letting go, trusting. We don't do it because it's easy. We do it because the alternative is stagnation. We do it because some stubborn voice in us, our soul perhaps, keeps nudging us forward. Come on, you came here to be more. In a second article by Merkich, she goes into more about the current astrological alignments, with a reported 5 planets having entered a retrograde motion at this time. Merkich writes that for the first time in a decade, we have 5 planets in retrograde at the same time. You might be reading a lot about how this time is all about pausing and not being able to get much done. But actually, from a soul perspective, this is going to be a hugely productive time. Whenever a planet goes retrograde, it offers an opportunity to review, revisit, remember, rewire, redo, reclaim, and release. The combination of all these retrogrades happening at the same time are like sending in a bunch of restorers, renovators, and cleaners to bring the building back to its true glory, to what it has really been all along, this time with even more sparkle and shine. Jupiter was the first planet to enter retrograde just after New Year's, and it will be the first to come out of retrograde on May the 9th. Merkich writes, it has been a good time to have an extended period of pondering your New Year's dreams and goals list for the year ahead. Jupiter retrograde may have really urged you to get clear on what areas of your life do you want to see expand? Where do you want to see positive growth? What needs to shift, change, or be acted upon in order to make that happen? Where are you ready for your next level? And what ceilings are you done with? With Mercury, Merkich writes that Mercury retrogrades every few months, and every few months, for a few weeks, we feel the following more than usual. Issues with phones, computers, electronics, communications going haywire. On a positive note, we might get a second chance of communicating with someone where things didn't go well the first time around, or we unexpectedly bump into someone from our past and get some closure or receive a message that helps us on our path. Merkich continues with Pluto, which she calls the head honcho of transformation. She writes, Pluto doesn't muck around. If he sees that something in your life or within yourself needs shifting, Pluto will demolish or renovate without waiting for permission, without apology. So while Pluto going forward might activate power within us, Pluto retrograde will ask us, do you see what has been activated here? Have you realized what you have to let go of? Have you accepted what is happening? Are you letting in the new energy that wants to emerge from within you? You may feel power as a major theme, confronting the ways in which you are in your power and the ways in which you are not. You may get clear messages regarding what you are doing that is sapping your power, and what you could be doing to give you more power. We are not talking here about egoic power, rather, authentic heart and soul power. Pluto loves a good detox, be it physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual. So if you feel compelled to go on a health kick, release old habits, purge some issues, go on retreat, do some hardcore healing, go on big clearing out sprees of your house or wardrobe, follow that inner guidance. Next is Mars. And Merkich writes that if energy is needed in a situation where there is usually no energy or low energy, if the waters need to be stirred because they have been dormant or inactive for too long, if an old issue needs to be brought to the surface, addressed and cleared out, then Mars will not be shy about adding some of his fire and get things done gusto to the equation. Saturn entered into retrograde motion approximately in late March, early April, and will be retrograde for another 4 months. Merkich writes that Saturn is the father of the zodiac. He loves discipline, commitment, hard work, structure, stability, and support. He is the foreman, walking around the building site, making sure the foundation is strong and everyone is working according to the right codes of practice. During retrograde, Saturn might make some people feel restricted, because Saturn doesn't just let you go forward with a song in your heart, on a wing, and a prayer. Saturn, like any good father before setting his child free out into the big wide world, will want to make sure you know how to take care of yourself, especially financially, materially, and structurally. Merkich closes with some guidance to people who seem to love getting caught up in all the geopolitical and geoeconomic dramas of the world today. She writes, dealt with unconsciously, there can be a whole lot of projection happening, with unowned emotions and issues flaring up, manifesting as anger toward others and erratic behavior. If you feel strong emotions coming up in you, take a deep, big breath before exploding onto someone else. Know that people who are resisting the rise of their inner truth will go into drama. Unless absolutely necessary, it is wise to not get caught up in the middle of someone else's karmic explosion, resistance, demolition process, or purge. If you find yourself in the midst of drama, check in with yourself to see what feels right, be it to listen without judgment, walk away until they calm down, or just observe without getting emotionally attached to the story being played out. All of our stories are right now attempting to be unraveled, like balls of wool that have been in tight balls for a long time. Attaching to stories and illusions that are in the process of unraveling will only create more knots and make the whole process take longer. I think I speak for most listeners when I say that the vast majority of us do not want this to go on any longer than is absolutely necessary for the overall positive changes to begin unfolding. Even though I, as a journalist, have to pay attention to what is going on, I am trying more and more to detach myself from specific events and outcomes. For example, I observe what is playing out with regard to the U.S. presidential election, but I'm not getting wound up by who says what or who does what. There are, however, some other events that still do push certain buttons within me, and that is where the guidance in this article from Merkich brings me back to grounding myself and releasing what still needs to be released from within me. In the show summary for the final words, I will also include a 3-minute video from Lee Harris, who also reports on the energies shifting at this time, and he shares some of his own insights as he reflects on information shared by Merkich. Create a wonderfully cleansing week until our next moment of now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is available on the blog through the website. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, Scene page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that we can't become what we need to be by remaining what we are. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.